Are we going to let a little sore throat stand in the way of a mailbag? Of course not. Let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to the Chief of the North mailbag. I am Seth Kaiser, the Chief of the North, here on RGR Football, and it is just a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Well, actually, here in Minnesota, we got about 10 inches of snow yesterday. My throat hurts. I'm a little under the weather. But you know what? If Patrick Mahomes can do a playoff run on a sprained ankle, I can do a mailbag with a little bit of a sore throat. Last week, I was maybe able to get through like a fourth of the questions that you guys asked. And so this is actually going to be kind of a part 2 mailbag, in that I'm going to go through a lot of the questions that I didn't get through on Twitter last time. However, I am going to go back to the comment section from last week, which I promised you I'd do, and I would never lie about such a thing. And I am going to answer those questions as well. Lots of questions about the offseason. You know how we do this every week. You ask questions. I try to provide some answers that I hopefully have just an ounce, a modicum, a minuscule, a microscopic amount of insight into. And even if I don't, I'll say it with confidence so you'll believe it. I mean, maybe or not. Either way, we'll have fun. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. I'm going to be drinking water a little more often. It'll be like a return to those of you who listened to the Chief of the North podcast years ago, about once or twice an episode. I would tell you how refreshing my drink was. So it'll be a return to that as I try to keep the throat working and willing as we get through this. Let's just dive right into it because there are a lot of questions still. There's questions that I didn't get to last time, but first let's go to the questions in the comment section. As you know, comments down there, put question marks in front of it so I know, and I'll go to those first next week, depending on how I'm doing recovering, because I'm getting my wisdom teeth taken out tomorrow, which should be interesting because I'm set for trial next Tuesday. I'm sure it'll be fine. But I think we'll be back in action here at least next Thursday. Probably won't be in on Monday. Those are kind of the breaks when you're apparently swelling up, and I've already swollen up enough since I was 27. So let's get right to it. Get to your questions. Make sure you put them here or check on Twitter the Wednesday before. You usually see a tweet asking for more mailbag questions. I didn't do that this week because I had so many questions left that were there were questions we could do now. So, all right, let's get going. Oh, some people said some really nice stuff in the comment section of last week's mailbag, and I just want you guys to all know that I appreciate every one of you. All right. Ian Connis asks, hey, Seth, if the Chiefs decided to go make a trade for a bigger name at wide receiver, who would be a good option? DJ Moore could be a prime one. He's like 26 and already under contract. This is Ian Sins. I think he's got 3 years left, getting $20 million a year. I'd personally rather they keep Juju or at least get someone equivalent. But if they decided they needed a legit, number one wide receiver, who would you call teams about? DJ Moore just got his contract, so I don't think he's probably on the market. One thing that so last year was weird. There haven't been a lot of seasons where multiple number one type receivers were traded. What I wish the Chiefs would have done, honestly, I wish they'd have traded for Amari Cooper because the Browns got him for a song, and his $20 million a year price tag now looks super reasonable considering his talent level and his production and what the current receiver market is. They kind of got in ahead of the Christian Kirk trade, if I'm recalling correctly. Maybe I'm getting that reversed, but I don't think I am. So they kind of got there. They got there before the market kind of blew up. So people were like, that contract's kind of stopping people from trading for him. And then it turns out, no, that's kind of a bargain for him, especially they traded barely anything to get him. So I wish the Chiefs had done that, frankly, because I think Amari Cooper is a number one receiver. I think he's a fringe number one receiver, but he's a number one receiver, and he's one that you're still happy to have as your number one receiver. So maybe fringe is the wrong word. He's an average number one receiver, which means a really good player, even though I use the word average, if that makes sense. Anyway, in terms of guys who might be available right now, I think the best option in terms of where level of play currently is, combined with contract situation, I think is DeAndre Hopkins. He's got 2 years left on his deal. You've got a $19 million hit and then a $15 million hit on the cap right now if you trade for him. That's, $17 million a year average. That's reasonable for a true number one wide receiver. He was still really productive last year with, you and me throwing him the ball. However, he may want to redo his contract again. That'd be a non-starter for me. He's on the wrong side of 30. So, if you call about a trade, the question for Hopkins is, are you happy? Are you willing to play on the contract as it is? Or are you going to look for, for an extension? Because you can't do an extension for a receiver on that side of 30. And so that would be kind of the game breaker part for me. I know it's been rumored that the Texans, at least the public rumors floating, is that they're asking for a second round pick. Considering his price tag and that kind of stuff, that'd be a little steep for me. But the fact that they're making a second round pick public tells me that they're probably saying, someone please give us a third rounder. But they're asking like a second and change, something like that right now. So that would be one to keep an eye on. I think DeAndre Hopkins is still a legitimate number one wide receiver. He's a guy who has a skill set that the Chiefs could really use. And he can threaten certain areas of the field in a way that Juju Smith-Schuster doesn't necessarily. So that would be the one I would look at, again, if they're looking to go for like a true number one wide receiver type. Charles Nielsen, man, you can tell this throat. I'm sorry. Just remember, this is my flu game, guys. This is me just gutting through, let me tell you. Somewhere in the back of my head, I can hear Briscoe making fun of me. Charles Nielsen asks, rather than trading one of the Chiefs' big-name players, I wonder if they should just consider trading some of the players they've taken in lower rounds. They've had some success. Not all this year, but when they have a year left in their rookie contracts, I'm thinking Snead, Gay, Watson, Williams, Smith, hopefully get a better pick back and reload with cheap rookies. Not arguing hard for this approach, but wondering what you think. I totally understand your reasoning. I think the idea would be that you'd maybe get a little bit better return because it's a guy on a cheaper deal. Generally speaking, though, I'm not really in favor of that because they're still there as cheap talent. And then if they walk in free agency the next year, depending on who the player is. So let's say it's a guy like we'll use Trey Smith as an example because he's a good player. And so it's not me saying that the Chiefs should trade Trey Smith, but he's a good player. So we'll use him as an example. So you could, let's say when he's got 1 year left in his rookie deal, that means you've got a year of very cheap control and the option of the franchise tag there if you want. If you trade him, you might get a good return for him. But if he just walks in free agency, a guy like that who's going to start every game, who's going to play a ton of snaps, that kind of stuff, you'll probably get a third round pick for him anyway once he walks in free agency. Maybe a fourth rounder, but so what'll happen there? So a third rounder or a fourth round pick, a compensatory pick, and you get that year of cheap control of that player. That's probably a better thing than, let's say you trade him for a second round pick, but then you lose that year of the player. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. I don't know why I asked that. You can't answer me right now. But so to me, that's why trading like the younger guys doesn't always make sense, because that year of cheap control, that really matters. And that's how you build a strong roster, is through that cheap control of players. And I mean, you make a good point, Charles, that you can rebuild with those draft picks, but it just becomes, a little tougher when you've already got a bird in the hand that's cheap. And then you got the potential bird in the bush that's also cheap. That's even more tough analysis. It's tough to go from this to this than it is from a bird in the hand that's expensive to a bird in the bush that's cheap, because you're not even getting that financial windfall. So I don't think that's the route I would go. And I think the reasons I've laid out are the reasons why. But I think it's a good idea in terms of you're thinking outside the box a little bit. I think that's a good thing. Let's see. Jacoby 12124 says, we never really saw the offense all healthy together. Do you think the Chiefs could run it back offensively and be better? Hardman and Tony barely played together. I think we saw in 2020 maybe some of the limits with the idea of a run it back approach, in that injuries can be goofy in terms of the toll they take. And when you have specifically talented players, you generally play a certain way. And the league is, and has been for years, gearing up to stop the Chiefs. They're the top of the mountain, even before winning the Super Bowl again, which that never gets old saying, does it? They are the team that people are building around, planning around, scheming for, and staying static in that situation can be tough. Now, I think the natural development within the offense of Tony and Sky Moore, which Andy Reid talked about, I think yesterday or the day before, he said that he expects them to be a lot more involved in the offense. One thing that was interesting when Tony came back and got healthy, his role in the offense was a little more muted, and early on, he started to get really involved early, and people kind of were like, "Whoa, what does that mean for Sky Moore that Tony can come in and do this right away?" But then you saw his role be a lot more limited in the playoffs, and I think that tells you that really Andy Reid had some specific stuff for Kadarius Tony and for Sky Moore, but Tony's better at that gadget player stuff, and so they need time to really wrap into the offense. It's hard to come into Andy Reid's offense and be an immediate contributor. What Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdez-Scantling did last year, that makes it all the more impressive what they did. And it goes to show, the value of guys that have been in the league for 3, 4, 5 years. They can come in, pick up an offense a lot more quickly. I don't see them running it back completely on offense. I think Hardman deserves to test the market. His injury was really unfortunate for him, but I think he's going to want to test the market. I do think other than that, the big decision that they have is Juju Smith-Schuster. But I don't think they should stay completely static. I think they should draft a little more talent at the receiver spots. You want to be able to threaten people against man coverage. I think Sky Moore is partly the answer to that, but I think they want to continue to develop in that area. Flyer T12 asks, what does Veach have to factor into the OBJ situation? So the Orlando Brown Jr. situation, obviously, he's up for a contract. They've said all the right things. They want to get it done. He said he wants to be a Chief. Last year, he turned down a very large contract, but it wasn't top of the market. Their issue was kind of the guaranteed money. I think it's one of the things that he has to take into consideration is he's dealing with an agent who is very, very new at this. And generally speaking, in my experience, when you have people that are new in things like litigation and negotiation, they tend to want to make their mark and show, hey, nope, I'm not messing around. I'm going to show you guys how this is done. And they tend to be tougher to negotiate with. So I think that's kind of a side factor. And I could be wrong there, but that's just generally what I've seen. I've been practicing law for almost 10 years now, and that's generally what I've seen. So it might be a little bit different in sports negotiations, but I'm guessing it's not. Sports negotiations, contract negotiations. And so I think he's got to factor in not just that, but he's also got to factor in that the offensive line is a sum of the parts. And they like Orlando Brown Jr., but they're already paying Joe Thuney top of the market contract. And once you pay your left tackle top of the market contract money, then what you're basically saying is Creed, Humphrey, or Trey Smith, or both, are walking. And it just depends on what you think of all of them. I think both Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey are better players than Orlando Brown, but neither of them play tackle. I would say I think Creed Humphrey is a significantly better player than Orlando Brown. I think Trey Smith is a much better player. And it sounds like I'm picking nits there, but like Creed is one of the best 3 players at his position in the NFL. I think Trey Smith is a top, if you include just guards in general, because you got right guard, left guard. He's a top 10 player at his position. I don't think Orlando Brown he might not be a top 10 left tackle, let alone tackle. So, I mean, you got to take that into consideration because it is 100%. And I actually I'm answering like 8 different mailbag questions in this at once because a lot of people asked about this. There's a domino effect there. You can only have so many top of the market contracts, and you've got to be very cautious who you hand those out to. That's why, as I'm really thinking about my whole, If I Were Brett Veach Part 2 series, which, by the way, check out If I Were Brett Veach Part 1, the Chief of the North newsletter, as I went through kind of some fun with the salary cap, the way the Chiefs can open up plenty of room to make the moves they want to make. My leaning with the Orlando Brown situation would be 1 more year of the franchise tag rather than a big contract. And he won't like that. He'll be upset with it. But I don't think that with what he did last year, I just don't think you can do a top of the market contract there because of, again, the domino effect that it has, because you've already got Patrick Mahomes, Joe Thuney, Travis Kelce, and ideally Chris Jones on top of the market deals, basically. And then you add that fifth one, and now you've kind of reached you basically you're reaching your limit on top of the market guys. And what I would say is, well, what do Patrick Mahomes, Joe Tooney, Travis Kelce, and Chris Jones have in common? Every one of them has an argument, or three of them are the best player at their position in the league, right? Mahomes, Kelce, Jones. Joe Tooney has an argument to as a top 3 player at his position in the league. One of these things, the whole Big Bird thing, one of these things is not like the other. And I like Orlando Brown. I like what he's brought to the team. I think it was a good trade to make, even if they let him walk this year. I think several years of cheap control of a player when they needed stability at the position, I think was 100% worth it. But you're doing a lot by giving him that top of the market deal, because you're limiting yourself in other areas. All right, Charles Nielsen, man, it's going to be bad when I don't get to any more of the Twitter questions, but you guys had so many in the comment section below. I mean, I don't know. We're going to start having it to where it's just this comment section that I'm getting it. Oh, by the way, as you're watching this, last week there were some issues with my camera. If I'm kind of fuzzy right now, I'm sorry. I am at the mercy of my equipment. And unlike Ryan, I'm not a tech savant. Maybe one day I'll get a nice camera. We'll see. You got to understand, if you can hear me clearly, you're getting the good part of this. Nobody needs to see this more clearly. That's not going to enhance your experience, I promise. Charles Nielsen asks, how would you rank the Chiefs 2022 edge rushers by the end of the year? Karlaftis, Clark, Dana, Dunlap. Is it good enough to draft someone else who's equivalent to Karlaftis? Or do you need someone with higher upside? I think if you drafted a guy with a similar floor and ceiling to Karlaftis, I think you're doing well. I would rank. So it's interesting because Mike Dana, when you're talking about him as a pass rusher, he's not really an edge rusher at this point in terms of what he does as a pass rusher. He was rushing more frequently from the interior, and he's a great fit there. So if we'll just say just as pass rushers, I think besides Chris Jones, obviously, I think Dana was the best pass rusher on the Chiefs besides Chris Jones last year. And I think after him, oh man, it gets tough, because I think Karlaftis if by the end of the year, I think Karlaftis very narrowly edges out Dunlap, who very narrowly edges out Clark. And all of them were okay. None of them were great. None of them were bad. They were okay, average to a little above average. You maybe give Karlaftis the edge because of his motor. But I think Dunlap was a little better at winning one-on-one matchups a little more frequently. And I think Clark is almost a combination of the two, the motor and the one-on-one matchups. You can build a pass rush around that if you have a superstar. And that's exactly what the Chiefs did, right? They had 4 guys, and along with Colin Saunders, who were okay pass rushers, and then 1 superstar. And because they had so many bodies that they could throw at it, they ended up having a really good pass rush. They didn't get a ton of pass rush on Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl, but that's not really how they were playing that game. They weren't necessarily playing to get consistent pass rush. They were trying to defend the run really well. And plus, that Eagles offensive line is just a beast. So I think, if you drafted someone who's the equivalent to Karlaftis, I think you're doing just fine, especially considering he was an average pass rusher as a rookie. That sounds like lukewarm praise, but it's actually a very high compliment. Benjamin Kos asks, if the Chiefs target a wide receiver early in the draft, do you go big or fast? I feel like we stack so many tight end wide receiver types. I want them to target a fast receiver. This team needs a consistent deep threat. MVS is not the answer. Oh, you're wrong about that. MVS is a good deep threat. And you can see it in the way that teams play the Chiefs. If you turn on film of the Super Bowl, you can see that they're often playing with 2 safeties high. There's a reason for that. It's because of what MVS did to the Bengals when they tried to play single high stuff. And it wasn't just the Bengals. There was multiple times throughout the year, teams, they have to respect MVS's ability to win deep. In terms everyone, opinions can vary on such things, but I would just say if Mahomes had hit about a half dozen throws that he missed during the regular season, MVS would have another, 3 or 4 touchdowns and 300 yards. And I think your opinion of him might be real different, but it wasn't a him issue on some of those plays. Mahomes' deep ball was in and out this last year. And that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. Those deep ball threats, those deep ball shots, they're hard to hit. But MVS, I don't think you want him to be your only deep threat. So I would agree with you that grabbing a fast player, a fast receiver, a deep threat type guy would be great. You just want to make sure that it's not just fast. Being a deep threat's a lot more than just being fast. Being a deep threat, you need to be able to track the ball. You need to be able to come down with it while maintaining speed and control. That's just as important as having speed. And so that's something they're going to need to figure out. I think they like Kadarius Tony as a deep threat. I think they should, but it'll just be interesting in terms of his health and his development in the offense. Crayson Neely asks, how big a role will KT have this upcoming season if they don't re-sign McCole? Kadarius Tony. So that rolls us right into it. Someone did comment here, Seth invested in a new high-def camera. Make me. No, I'm just kidding. Like I said, if I'm blurry to you right now, it's only enhancing your experience. Believe me, you don't need to see me more clearly. So how big a role will Kadarius Tony have? I don't think they traded for him to give him a small role. I think they really like him a lot. I think there's a reason you're hearing a lot of things about Mahomes' connection to him. I think they're going to want him to have a prominent role in the offense. And it's just going to be about getting his health right and figuring out, how can we keep these lingering hamstring, that kind of stuff, injuries from occurring. And that's going to be the X factor with him. I meant it when I wrote in the article I wrote about Brett Veach, not the If I Were Brett Veach series, but kind of talking about how he's made this roster his own. You can go check that out in the Chiefs of the North newsletter as well. I wrote that they traded, I think, a third and then maybe a sixth or something like that for Tony. If he never plays another snap, it was worth it already, which is, he's not going to not play another snap, but just by helping them secure the 1 seed, which he absolutely did with some really important plays during the season, and that punt return alone to help them win the Super Bowl, worth it to me. So I'm really excited to see what he brings next year. He is a more multifaceted talent than people realize. It almost gets lost in his athleticism. Man, so I've got a lot of questions about Orlando Brown that were on Twitter. I'm going to try to get to a few Orlando Brown questions, or not Orlando Brown, a few mailbag questions from Twitter. I feel bad, but we're already at 22 minutes. And so we'll just go a little bit longer. So Kenny asks, and now I'm to Twitter. You guys ask so many great questions in the comments. Since Andy Reid became the head coach, the Chiefs have allowed Rodney Hudson and Mitch Morse to leave via free agency. Are you emotionally prepared for Creed Humphrey to play on another team in 2025? No, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. Man, that would be a bummer because Creed is such a good player. And he walked in the door and was a really good center, and then took another step forward in his second year to be an elite center. And so that's going to be really, really tough. But man, they've just churned through centers, haven't they? Beam says, can a new offensive coordinator mean more aggressive offense, particularly on 4th and short? I don't think so if it's Matt Nagy. I really like that they brought in Pep Hamilton. I really like that I want to see them bring in guys from outside of Reid's normal coaching tree, because I do think you want to continually get new ideas. One of them being that aggressiveness and seeing how much that can benefit you. We all saw what it meant to the Eagles in the Super Bowl, having 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 being like automatics. And that's something they should really think about. Now, of course, that's the whole sneak thing, which brings us into the conversation when they're never going to sneak Patrick Mahomes. So there you go. So yeah. So Nate asks, am I crazy for thinking a Kyle Pitts trade is a genius move for us this year? Dynamic player, gets learned from Kelsey, potentially transition to be pass number 1. I mean, if the Falcons were interested in trading him, I'm assuming they're not though. But maybe if they are, yeah, I think Kyle Pitts looks terrific, and I think he would be a great fit. But I think the Falcons I think they're going to try to compete. I could see them trying to trade for Lamar Jackson and trying to contend, and you don't trade away guys like that. Mark asked, and a lot of people asked similar questions to this. What do you think of the prospect of Eric Bieniemy taking Lewis or others with him to Washington? He's definitely going to take a few guys with him. Which honestly will be demonstrative of, him being a guy that everyone liked working with, that kind of thing. That always happens when you lose guys. Andy Reid is the straw that stirs the drink. And we have seen the coaching staff now start to get picked kind of clean, and it'll be interesting just to see, though, what he and Matt Nagy can do and the staff that they can put together. That's one reason, like I said, I love that they brought in Pep Hamilton I to interview for the offensive coordinator job. I hope they find a job for him within the organization, because I think he would bring a little bit something different to the table, and I want to see them do that. Andy Reid continuing to do what he does, but also have some different names brought in. PJ Thompson asks, which Chief likely to move on next season will be the hardest to replace? Either Juan Thornhill or Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't think they're able to keep either of them, probably. And I think both do very specific things that will be tough to replace. Juju Smith-Schuster, if you go back, his stat line was only okay throughout the season. But if you go back to some pretty key moments, he was a guy that they trusted to win one-on-one against man coverage with like back shoulder throws and that sort of thing. Even though he's not a great separator one-on-one, he can with underneath routes. He's not great at it, but he's good at it. And they needed that because they didn't have anyone else like that. But they also trusted him a ton against zone. He was able to punish teams really well. Juan Thornhill had a pretty good season, a good season. And he's got range. He tackles well. He's got good ball skills. He's a good safety. And it's tough to replace guys like that. All right. We have come up on 26 minutes already. Thank you guys for so many questions. Great questions in the comment section. It basically shouted down Twitter this time. So well done, you. You silenced that which can never be silenced. I appreciate you guys asking these questions. Hopefully I'm healthy enough to be back in action this next Thursday, even though I'm sure I won't be on Monday. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate your questions. Again, make sure you hit like, subscribe, do all that stuff, because Ryan deserves your support. They do terrific work here at RGR Football, and I'm here too. I appreciate it. Thanks for the questions. It is a great week to be a Chiefs fan.